Hi, this is Andrea Michelle, and today I'm going to be talking about the dwarf planet Ceres. Ceres is a dwarf planet in the asteroid belt. As a matter of fact, it was Ceres and her promotion as a dwarf planet that got Pluto demoted from a planet to a dwarf planet. She's a very, very important planet to consider in astrology. So if you're not familiar with her, hopefully by the time I'm finished today, you will have a better understanding and appreciation of Ceres and her role for us in modern astrology. So today I'm going to be speaking about the brand new Ceres-Sun cycle that began on July 21st of 2022 at 29 degrees of Cancer. And this is the anorectic degree of Cancer. And the anorectic degree is a very, very tense degree for any sign in any chart because it's the full complement of that sign energy concentrated in the last degree. And oftentimes, any planet or point, asteroid or whatnot, at a 29 degree of any sign indicates to some extent an anxiety or a reluctance to let go of whatever the significations of that sign energy means. So in this case, we're talking about Ceres, who's also known as the Great Mother. And she has an affinity with the sign of Cancer, even though some might see her as a modern day co-ruler of the sign of Virgo, because she's known as the goddess of grain. She was the Olympian goddess who provided humankind with the ability to grow food for themselves, basically agriculture. So it's as a result of Ceres' generosity that came from a deep, deep initiation through loss, which we will discuss more, that she gifted humanity with the capacity to feed ourselves, essentially, as the myth goes. So I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll dive in. So to start here, I found this the other day, and I thought this was pretty good because one of the things we'll be discussing is Ceres' discovery chart and what the discovery chart says about Ceres and where we are in respect to the whole mythos and the mythology of Ceres collectively. Supposedly, this quote was attributed to Carl Jung. I can't be 100% sure of that, but that's what the attribution was where I found this. Comfort is a drug. Once you get used to it, it becomes addicting. Give a weak person consistent stimulation, good food, cheap entertainment, and they'll throw their ambitions right out the window. The comfort zone is where dreams go and die. Now, I would say a weak person might not be a very kind attribution or thing to say. I would say the majority of us, at least for a portion of our lives, we just take things for granted. We don't really question things much. How many of us really just prefer comfort and supposed safety and security over discomfort or being challenged in our beliefs or our thoughts or our likes and dislikes? So here I ask the question, how often do we ask for something and then we get it, but not in the way we are consciously wanting it or consciously wanting it, especially if it's uncomfortable? So some of the themes and keywords of Ceres, also known as Demeter. So Ceres is the Roman name, Demeter is the Greek name. Codependence, stubborn anger, blaming, negotiation or negotiating to remain willfully ignorant, denying our sensual nature or erotic initiations, overly processing emotions, which emotions have historical filters associated with them. So to overly process something is to kind of, well, not just kind of, but to revisit history over and over again. And sometimes it feels like a cathartic experience to do that, but oftentimes nothing really ever gets resolved. It seems like it because the emotions are very strong. They impact our nervous system. In fact, they are part of our nervous system. So it feels like a lot is happening, but in all honesty, oftentimes it's just a replay of what we already know. So overly processing emotions to avoid pure feeling. Suffering as a victim versus empowered suffering, which can be a narcissistic tendency, which is also can be an attribution of Ceres in her lower vibration. She's also initiation through loss. So if we look at the way I look at Venus in the chart as reflective of our feminine wiring by sign, house, and aspect, then all of the other feminine planets, asteroids are facets of the crystal of the feminine. So for me, Ceres is the facet of the feminine most associated or intimate with this surrendering and renewal of the entire Venus cycle. And as a matter of fact, we are currently collectively in, as I'm speaking this, recording this, the tail end of Venus's surrendering and discovery cycle of the current Capricorn Venus cycle. So it seems like a fitting time to speak about Ceres. So Ceres also was the progenitor and the goddess for whom the Eleusinian mystery rites, excuse me, were performed, or that she taught the Eleusinian mystery rites, were the rites of learning to die before you die. And what is dying? The ego. So any initiation requires some form of ego death in order to discover more of what can never die in us. So I see Ceres, as well as Mercury, Hermes, and Chiron as the three main initiators in the chart, each in different ways, but all weaving together this theme of moving between the worlds, being somehow a bridge between the upper and lower worlds, the ego and the soul. And Ceres, when this initiation takes place in us, when we volunteer to work with, to participate in these types of initiations, as challenging and as difficult and uncomfortable as they are, this becomes empowered suffering versus the suffering as a victim that is up here. It's not narcissistic at all. It's suffering for our deeper embodiment, suffering for our evolution. Ceres also earned earthly wisdom as a result. We become so much more generous because, just like Ceres, when we've undergone these deep initiations and we've come to face the reality of a situation, the reality of life as it is on its own terms and our place in it, rather than forcing ourselves onto the world through our views and the way we want life to be, when we're able to receive that, we become generous because we have tapped into the wellspring in us where the regenerative resources live. That place in us where we are in contact with soul. So we become generous, like Ceres, who had Triptolemus teach humanity the art of agriculture. So we could feed ourselves and not rely on having to propitiate the gods for our survival. We also become good at holding transformational spaces for empowerment for others, because we are self-empowered now. When we hold that space within us, we literally become the space in which this can happen and be engendered in other people to self-empower themselves. Ceres integrated through initiation also can be the healthy integration of bodily needs, wants, and desires. So we move from craving to wanting to an intimacy with a desire that we carry, and the ability to transform it into an empowerment. once again. She's also the initiatrix into fuller human expression through this merging of soul and ego in her role as the initiatrix, as I mentioned earlier with the other initiators. And by no means is that an exhaustive list for Ceres. It's simply some of the keywords to give you some sense of how I work with Ceres and some of her deeper significations. Other astrologers who work with Ceres on a mundane basis also see her as, and I do as well, epigenetics. She rules epigenetics, and epigenetics is the influences from our environment that affect our genes. So it's anything other than the genetics that we inherit from our family of origin and karma. It is how the external factors in our environment trigger or turn on and off certain genes, activate certain gene responses in our RNA, DNA that shift us, that alter us. Okay. She's also associated with agriculture, as I said, so she can be used to determine in mundane astrology cycles of production and agriculture and commodities. Okay, but I deal with more of the soul evolutionary aspect of Ceres, so hence why I focused on things that I focused on. One of her epithets, one of the forms that Ceres takes, is Thesmophoros, which means lawgiver. So this is from a website which I encourage you to look at. It's fascinating. It's from this woman, Megan Angus. And this is her words. In late October, bridging the time between Mabon and Samhain, we come upon a beautiful multi-day holiday from the Greeks called Thesmophoria. Greek women held this rite after all the pomp and ritual of the Eleusinian mysteries. So this is where women gathered together on their own. They dedicated this festival to Demeter Thesmophoros, a variant of Demeter, who was the lawgiver. Interesting that I'm recording this on Jupiter's day too. Jupiter is the lawgiver, but in a different way. Observed after the crops had been entirely pulled in, but before the seeds for next year's planting were committed to the earth. The epithet Thesmophoros derives from Demeter's function in revealing and disseminating two ancient secrets, the cultivation of grain and the initiation into the mysteries. So I wrote here, marriage of time-bound practical wisdom with timeless perennial wisdom through logos. And what is logos? The word, the law. Desmos means laws, but also that which is set down or laid down, as from the late past or source. In other words, a universal law, something from the beginning of time. Homer uses the word to refer to the law of the marriage bed of Odysseus and Penelope. It is a divine law, fate, ritual law, or natural law. Desmos can also refer to ritual customs and rites, so we may interpret this name for Demeter as source of the laws and rituals of the natural world, a law or order of conduct going back into the reaches of time and memory. The ritual of Thesmophoria then harkens to an older, more natural order from before the laws of man. Okay. So this is, again, one facet of Ceres, and one that's going to come back a little bit later on. So here we go. I'm going to start with the Ceres discovery chart, because this is going to set the stage for everything else that I'm going to present here. So for me, I'm fascinated with the discovery charts of the planets and asteroids because they show us where humanity is currently stuck or doing. Stuck doesn't have to be the term we use, but where humanity currently is collectively. For certain individuals, it's going to be different, but collectively within the myth and our way forward. So because I look at the chart from an evolutionary perspective, I'm always looking at the nodal axis. And for me, whether it's a personal chart of a human being or the chart of a planetary body, the nodes represent where we're coming from with respect to the energies or signatures of that planet or asteroid in question, and what we're looking to have more experiences of via that planet or asteroid in order to help balance out and become more fully experienced in the full expression of that planetary possibility. So this is supposed to be here, by the way. I don't know how that moved, but there we go. So the few things that I want to really point out here is Ceres right here at the top of the chart in the 10th house. She was discovered in Palermo, Italy, January 1st, 1801. Here she is at the top of the chart in Taurus, conjunct this fixed star here by literally 1 arc minute. So they are married in this chart. And what is this fixed star? This is Algol. Algol is the head of Medusa in the constellation of Perseus. Perseus, who was the one who slew Medusa in the Greek myth. Okay. And it's, as I wrote here, near exact. So one of the ways we can look at this is stuck in anger / rage / victimhood, that I am not getting what I want, or I want what I had. So I say this because when we look at the myth of Ceres and Persephone, her daughter, which is really everything in a myth, in any myth where there's a protagonist, one or more protagonists, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, all the other facets of the people in the chart or the people in the myth are facets of the protagonist. So everything that we encounter in the Ceres Demeter myth is an aspect of Ceres Demeter herself. So the loss of her daughter, or the abduction of her daughter by Hades to the underworld, is a shock to a way of being that Ceres knew of herself that she wanted to continue. She had this young daughter. She was abducted in a field picking flowers, very maiden-like, very young, with this Taurus energy here. And suddenly she disappeared. Some say she was raped by Hades. Some say she went voluntarily. I feel like the point is that it was a sexual initiation or a hormonal initiation. Basically, the necessary initiation of the cycles of time, that we're not static in our experiences, that things shift and there's a weft and a warp to our experiences. And Ceres is associated with cycles ultimately, which is why the seasons began thanks to Ceres. So the idea that she was disrupted out of this basically willful ignorance of just staying in one place the whole time, staying in one way of being via her daughter in the maiden phase, right, was taken away from her. And Algol represents, to me, because of it, it's not to get into the whole Pallas Athene Algol mystery or myth right now, but Algol's head was a head full of snakes. It's where we've been cut off from our body wisdom, and all of our life force energy indicated by the snakes is going into our heads. So it's literally where we're angry, we're cut off. It's a victim kind of anger. It can be until we embody it, because all of our life force is stuck in our heads. So Ceres separating square from Saturn retrograde, Chronos, right? Time, and squaring the Leo ascendant. Challenge to break out of being fixed in anger, freezing her in a specific time or historical context. Challenge to become the authority at the center of her life, not beholden to the circumstances outside of her, needing to draw her out of her stupor to have an experience of more of herself, but to be more in command, in charge of being at the center of her life, being able to navigate and willingly go through whatever experiences for her own evolution, our own evolution, are necessary in order for us to fill out into more of who we are. Also, the confrontation with the square by reality. The reality of living from fear. What is Saturn? Oftentimes it's fear. And also reality. So the reality of survival-based, it's like a survival-based signature based on a fear of losing an attachment, losing what I hold dear, which is really losing an attachment, because as we know, she gets her daughter back. She doesn't get her daughter back the whole time, but throughout the rest of the myth, Ceres goes through her initiations to understand and become then the patroness of cycles of time. And Saturn also is associated with cycles. So the initiation of time through Kronos, a Titan, right? One of her father, to become a student of and daughter and progenitor of cycles, to understand the necessity for the cyclical nature of reality, but to find her center within the initiations of life, so that the experiences that happen, the changes that happen, we can navigate them without getting knocked away from our center through them. The sun here is on a fixed star called Nunki, which is the fletching of the arrow of the celestial archer. Okay. It's also the ascendant ruler here. So the fletching stabilizes an arrow in flight, challenging us to transmute the rigidity into stability and become centered in oneself, in ourself, in order to fully engage and participate in our own transmutation. So what I just said about being the fletching of the arrow, so that we can discover our center that's unwavering within experiences that life throws at us, that we can actually participate in the experiences without getting lost in them, and start to receive the experiences as part of the working us into where we are still fixed and rigid, to soften into deeper stability through the unknown. So in the heart center here, Leo, is the bridge between the upper and lower worlds, and exactly the place where we find our stability, our inner compass. So the moon here at 29 degrees of Cancer, which is the inception degree of this new Ceres-Sun cycle, as I mentioned earlier. So the Ceres discovery chart, excuse me, the moon was at the very, very same position at the discovery of Ceres as it is at this new Sun Ceres cycle. So here we have that anorectic degree again. It's applying to a conjunction to Jupiter retrograde in Leo in the 12th house here. So one thing to consider here, I know a lot of astrologers for this type of thing use whole sign houses. I use porphyry house system for most things. Sometimes I do look at the whole sign system, but for me, the quadrant house systems tend to be more personalized and unique. And I know this isn't the unique aspect, but it's not for a unique person, but it's definitely, it feels like the place in which this was found, Italy, speaks volumes about the nature of the energy of Ceres in this case, or any other planet in the discovery charts of any other planet or asteroid. So one of the ways we can look at this is part of the attachment is to the God realm, as they say in Buddhism. They talk about the different realms of experience, 6 in all. The God realm, the Asuras, or the angry gods. Then there's the human realm. Then there's the realm of the animals, and then there's the realms of the hungry ghosts, and the hell realms. And so the God realm, the only realm in which anything is really, really possible in terms of true, authentic experience and evolutionary fulfillment or change, is the human realm. Believe it or not, for all its foibles and seemingly contradictory place states of being and confusion, the human realm is the place where the most can be affected in terms of true change and accessing and being able to apply truth through honesty and these initiatory experiences. So this attachment to the God realm or getting what I want can be here. Again, Jupiter being the king of the gods and her brother. Overcoming the attachments to the ego identity, take her, our place as Demeter Thesmophoros, right? Divine natural lawgiver. So when we overcome our attachments through this Ceres initiation, we literally have the capacity to know ourselves or apprentice ourselves as the divine and natural lawgiver portion of Ceres. Now, does that mean we become the lawgiver for everybody else? No. What it means is we then have a natural understanding of natural cosmic law and can act upon that from inside and act accordingly. We are not beholden to man-made laws. This is not anarchy that I'm talking about. I'm talking about having a deeper experience and intimacy with my place in the world and how I am a player among other players, and I have my unique role. And because I am centered in myself, I am then by necessity, because that's how it works, connected deeply with the web of life that is everything and everyone else. And I am much more attuned to natural cosmic law. And then I can live from there and have that be the center from which I respond, act from, and share my gifts with others, with life. Moon is also trine Chiron here in the 4th. So the way I see Chiron is based on Adam Gainsbourg's work with Chiron. He has an amazing book called Chiron, the Wisdom of the Deeply Open Heart. And he sees that Chiron is the higher octave of the moon. So here we have, not only the moon in its own sign, the 29th degree, we have Chiron, its higher octave, in the natural home of the moon, the 4th house, and in this trine relationship. So vulnerability as the key to this surrendering process through loss that Ceres asks of us. The vulnerability as the key to the kingdom of our own sovereignty, of being able to access this natural divine law. That's another way of looking at the Ceres Saturn square. If we're looking at Saturn in the sense of man-made law, so that's not all that Saturn is, of course. Saturn can also be about divine law, but the laws of institutions, you could say, the laws that are made by humans, by society, by culture, which is not the same as natural divine law. I also want to point out here that the North Node ruler of Aries here is Mars in Taurus on a fixed star called Almach. And Almach is Andromeda's snagged foot, which is about to be consumed by the sea monster Cetus. Okay? So Almach can be the imperative to overcome survival or fear-based reality. It can also be attachment to remaining ignorant of reality. We can say that about Ceres, right? Initially, when we encounter her in her myth. It's also an opportunity to stimulate the flow of Shakti by addressing the very thing most feared. What is that? Here we come back to Algol. Shakti trapped in the head through the initiations that Ceres undergoes. And by the way, Ceres is the only one of the Olympian gods to become human for a time. So again, here we are talking about our human initiations, our initiations into the only realm of the 6 realms in Tibetan Buddhism, at least, where true transformation, true learning, true evolution can take place. So she becomes doso, a nursemaid for a time. So stimulating the flow of Shakti, Mars in Taurus. We have Mars in Taurus right now, as a matter of fact. So here we have another coincidence. This moon here on the 29th degree of Cancer, Mars currently traveling through the sign of Taurus. Okay. So here we have what's, I'm going back to January of this year. Again, I'm trying to piece together this whole little story here. So back in January of 2022, late January, early February, those of you who were with me, who are part of the IC, who were there for my lunar guide month, I spoke about this, so this will be familiar to you. Ceres was with the North Node and Algol again. Now, obviously, Algol has moved. Fixed stars move 1 degree every 72 years. So whereas Algol was at 23 degrees here in 1801, now Algol is at 26 degrees. And Ceres here, very, very close by, just as the nodes were transitioning into the new, from the Gemini Sag axis to the Taurus Scorpio axis here. So here we are returning to Algol, the snakes, the erotic Shakti life force. And here we are aided by this Taurus Scorpio axis, which is the axis of sensuality and sexuality, right? Moon and Venus here. Oh, very close to Nunki, by the way, which is now at 12. Here it was at 9 degrees here. Nunki is now very close here. I think it's 12 degrees of Capricorn. So here we have that Nunki theme again, the fletching of the arrow that keeps us going straight. No matter where we're moving in space, we know we're stable in where we're going. No matter where the arrow hits, whether it hits the target or not, we are with ourselves. We are centered in ourselves. So no matter where we end up, we're good. Whether it worked out or not, because we are with ourselves and we can respond from that place of being in charge. So Moon and Venus here in a waning sesquisquare in Capricorn. You can use in this way, Capricorn as patriarchy. Now, when I speak about patriarchy, I'm not talking about men, and I'm not talking about necessarily old white men. We are all complicit in patriarchy. Patriarchy is what has happened over the last 5,000-6,000 years with the advent of a hierarchical structure to society where man-made laws started to erode or were placed on top of, or where natural law was reinterpreted for man-made designs for power and control, but are not actually, where man-made laws are basically put on top of natural law, organic, cosmic law, and for the sake and benefit of a few, rather than the whole. That's what I'm talking about for patriarchy here, okay? So, a sesquisquare aspect is a challenging aspect. It's similar in a sense to the anorectic degree of a sign. There's a discomfort in it. There's a sense of wanting to hold on to what we know, to everything we've achieved throughout that whole sign energy, or what we've achieved In this case, this is before the trine, but it's meant to adjust us in a social context, because this is a waning sesquisquare. So we need to adjust in a social context. We learn it through a social context. What is ours to share? And refine our knowledge to meet what is actually relevant for now, and not just to impose what we think we know, our beliefs, our laws, our rules onto others. So the sesquisquare aspect is to further refine our knowing of what we have to share. It's also the development of self-accuracy in the social context, okay? Being accurate with what we know. Not assuming the role of Thesmophoros, even if accurate from the past, Capricorn, until it is learned or earned through practical application for this time, here, now. Capricorn, associated with time, history. So not going by what we know by default from history, resting on our laurels from the past, but really, really adjusting to using past history to justify this frozen anger, victimized anger, blaming anger potentially, to really, really refine and get clear on and accurate around what we're attached to, what we are emotionally attached to, what we feel safe knowing, but that not necessarily is beneficial for us moving forward. What might be keeping us from learning more? It could be learning more about the true history of what happened, rather than just assuming that we know what happened based on the filters that we were looking at in the past. Okay, so this would have been in January of this year. So this would have been a waning, or I'm sorry, a waxing moon Venus conjunction here. Yes, this would have been a waning moon Venus conjunction because of, well, obviously here, because the moon is approaching Saturn and Venus was morning star here. Venus was the beginning, toward the beginning of the new Venus and Capricorn cycle. So again, the idea with waning moon Venus conjunctions is we're sloughing off. This is a very, very full moon that's weighted down with the energies of the entire lunar cycle and is helping to slough off attachments to the past. So where do we need to make adjustments to our history as we know it in order to get more clear on the reality of the situation as it is now? Not from a historical context, but to really, really get clear and accurate about what is this time now asking of us to know about this configuration here. Okay. And what that is too much to go into now, but I just wanted to give this to you around, again, putting the pieces together of where we're coming from and where we're going in this new Ceres cycle. So now I want to go back a little bit further into this Ceres-Sun cycle inception of January 13th, 2020 at 23 Capricorn. So you'll see this party here. You might recall astrologers speaking about the Sun, Saturn, Pluto conjunction and the gravitas and the gravity of that. But many astrologers forgot or don't pay attention to Ceres, so they didn't realize that Ceres was in the party there too. So this is Ceres really, really, for me, an opportunity for the feminine to come back into power, for the ways in which feminine power also needs to be adjusted and accounted for. Not just blaming men or the patriarchy, but where has the feminine also been distorted, been on power trips in its own way, been a subject or slave to time and historical precedent to continue to act a certain way, like repressed, enraged, self-righteous anger, whether there was actually a historical precedent for that anger, which was completely valid. Are we holding on to it like a medal? Are we holding on to it and making it part of our identity rather than letting it flow freely and invigorate us and enliven us and help us move forward with the current of life as it unfolds, rather than keeping it stuck in blaming or victimization? Okay. So I also love that the sun is moving from the transpersonal Pluto to the social planet Saturn to the asteroid belt here, Ceres, and the inner planet Mercury. The sun is hitting each one of these, starting the new cycle with each one of these. Okay. And I write here, my theory is that the main asteroid belt goddesses hold the key to healing the split between our personal interests, held by the inner planets, our personal interests, wills, and wants, and needs, and the social role, larger purpose, and individuation potential of the transpersonal and the social planets. So they're the interstitial space or the intermediaries to help us in our multivalent human, to understand and appreciate ourselves as a multivalent human being. I also saw this cycle as the seeding potential to rediscover our feminine power and authority. And again, when I speak of the feminine and masculine, I'm not speaking of women and men. I'm speaking of the two fundamental, or binary, non-binary, or whatever. They're the two fundamental forces in the universe of the masculine and feminine that have nothing to do with gender. And whatever iteration they are, they come through in us, however we are wired for them. In some of us, way more of one than the other, and some of us more equally one and the other. No matter what the iteration, these two facets, components of life thrum and exist and weave through every human being, the whole cosmos. Okay. So seeding the potential to rediscover our feminine power and authority. How? First acknowledging and then grieving Ceres, and then owning our abnegation of personal sovereignty through choosing false safety, security, and comfort. If we remember in the Ceres myth, she grieves the loss of her daughter. She grieves and grieves and grieves and grieves. She gets stuck in her grief for a time. And there's two different versions of the myth. There's the Eleusinian version of the myth, in which she encounters way more people who help her in her negotiations than in the Akkadian myth, which is a lot more raw and primal. And there, she's, for the most part, on her own. And not only is she grieving the loss and rape of her daughter, but she gets raped herself by her brother Neptune, Poseidon. So it's adding insult to injury. So these two myths, each has something different to teach us. But one of the things that I find very telling is that in the Akkadian myth, she releases her anger into a river. I don't have the name of the river on the tip of my tongue right now, but she washes away her anger. And to me, what that is a final surrendering to allowing the anger to move, to not hold it anymore and make it a point of contention, a point of pride even. Because Ceres can be narcissism, right? Not letting that define her, who she is. And the washing in the river is the flowing of, allowing the flowing of her life force, which is trapped in this self-righteous anger, to flow once again and re-enliven, reinvigorate her letting the Shakti energy flow once again. So the North Node here in Cancer, which is on a fixed star called Alhenna, which is the foot of the twin Pollux in the Twins constellation. Pollux is the immortal twin. So in 2020 here, this date, at this conjunction, starting the Ceres cycle in January 13th of 2020, the North Node was here at this choice point. Are we going to continue this inner battle of divine versus human? Or are we ready to help lessen the gap and become the divine human? Because we are a species ruled by either or dichotomy, it's very, very challenging for us to accept things as both and. And that is part of this initiation of merging ego and soul, is this dying before you die. This helps to bridge, this helps to bring the ego, which is crucially important for life on the 3D plane, but becoming more in line with and attuned to and an agent of the soul and the soul's true, authentic desire to be alive and come more firmly rooted into our human self-identity. And so now we are back to current times, this July 21st, 2022 inception here. And again, here's that 29 degrees of Cancer here, okay? So again, as we know, it's the same degree of the discovery chart moon. It's the last portion of Venus's surrendering and discovery phase right now, okay? So we're currently in the Capricorn Venus cycle that began in January of this year. And Venus is, again, if we look at Venus as the feminine generally, and Venus in our chart is our unique feminine wiring, then these other aspects of the feminine, like Ceres, like Vesta, like Juno, Pallas Athene, Diana, Artemis, any of the asteroid goddesses, they're all facets of the feminine, okay? So, and I also, as I remembered, as just a reminder that I view Ceres as the facet of the feminine most associated with the whole Inanna descent and rebirth cycle. And how appropriate that this is happening in the surrendering and discovery phase here. So what are we surrendering? This gripping on a way of self-identifying. Cancer as the sign of the self-identity, right? That we've been gripping on a particular way and attaching to a particular way of identifying that no longer serves us. This codependency, this overly processing our emotions, this needing to understand the emotional content, to think that that's going to actually help us get out of this trapped situation, rather than diving more deeply into feeling, surrendering this to access more of our depth, where true feeling resides, literally in the lower chakras for both women and men. Being the possessive mother, being the mother that doesn't want her child to grow up, aka an aspect of herself, doesn't want to grow up and understand that there is change that has to happen in life for us to grow. So this is also square, and the next slide I'll show you, Venus's transmutation degree, which happens October 22nd of this year. So at 29 Libra, which is pretty remarkable, that Venus will be at the anorectic degree of a sign of her rulership with the sun at the point of her superior conjunction of the sun, which is her transmutation phase, which is the feminine form of transformation. Okay. So again, this is like preparing us right now, whatever we do to honor this new Ceres cycle, wherever it lands in our chart, whatever we can do to bring Ceres more alive for us, to take initiative, to go eyes wide open into our initiations, into what's ready to leave, what's ready to go, our attachments, our false securities, our false safeties. Where are we choosing false comfort over deeper initiation, over the deeper capacity to know ourselves as fully able to be present and attuned to and lovingly engage vulnerably with whatever is arising for us in our experience. The moon here is applying to a conjunction to the North Node in Taurus. The moon last touched the South Node, so it still has the energy of the South Node. And what does any sign in the South Node mean? Our past, what's really conditioned in us, what we're really familiar with, hiding, staying the same. Scorpio is the sign most closely associated with our evolution, but it can also be where we refuse at the same time. In its shadow, denser aspect, it's literally, I refuse to change. So where are we refusing to undergo our transformations, Scorpio? Where are we refusing to be seen? To ourselves? Where are we still insisting on remaining oblique versus transparent? And I love it. Again, if you remember, this is the sign Taurus, the sign of Ceres at her discovery. So this is about releasing the last vestiges of codependency, mental processing, over processing. There's nothing wrong with our minds and doing some sort of processing, but this overly, seemingly cathartic mental processing it just really oftentimes takes us nowhere. We feel temporarily assuaged or cathartic, but is it really, really actually doing anything? So releasing any refusal to surrender, to deny, which is denying my authentic power. Okay. So again, this Ceres-Sun new inception point, which is squaring where Venus and the Sun will be at her transmutation, is preparing us to loosen the grip of emotional history to make room for more authentic feeling, which is Venus. And here we are at the Venus-Sun superior conjunction, October 22nd of this year, at 29 Libra. I decided not to put the whole chart in here because of what I really wanted to focus on. Moon, Venus, Sun, nodes, Ceres, in whatever iteration they are in combination here. So, I wrote the conjunction is at 29 degrees of Cancer, but that's not true. The conjunction is 29 degrees of Libra. So the moon here is in a waxing sesquisquare. Remember we had the waning sesquisquare here at Ceres with Algol. Now we have the waxing sesquisquare. So waxing and waning makes a huge difference. And not a lot of astrologers really speak to that. That when an aspect is applying or separating, there's whole different ways of addressing and applying or working with the energy of the planet that the one planet is making a contact with. Very different. Different approaches to manifesting or alchemizing those energies. So with the waxing sesquisquare here, with the North Node in Taurus, it's to curtail any egoic inflation from the trine, because the sesquisquare always follows the trine, right? 120 degrees. So curtailing any egoic inflation from the trine, which can be identifying with suffering as a victim, that narcissism I spoke of, derailing the potential for deeper embodiment and accessing our true power again, okay? So any of these things would be derailing our potential for deeper embodiment and accessing our true power. And this is where there's a lot of different ways we can look at where and how we access true power in an individual chart and even a mundane chart. But for all intents and purposes, wherever Venus is in whatever sign at the superior conjunction, when she is furthest from Earth, And she's having her second of two conjunctions that only the inner planets have, Venus and Mercury. This is where we really access our local source of power. Venus direct and Sun, farthest from Earth. We really have no outer reference for what relationship should look like, and we haven't since the immersion phase, 51 days prior. And we're going to remain in the underworld for a time. So this is where we really, really have to adjust to relying on our own power and resources, our inner resources, to know who we are and develop relationship with who we are. And in the context now, because the transmutation phase, which begins at this superior conjunction, we are now, even though we're still invisible, we're now starting to open into the evening star portion of the Venus cycle, rather than the morning star. Morning star is I, me, mine. Evening star is us, we, them. Okay? So this is the ultimate surrender point into the source of my authentic power. Our sun vitalizes our soul codes here by transducing or translating spirit for matter, and vice versa. Literally, sun acts as conductor and awakens us into our heart's power, our love's power, to be the translator of spirit and matter, of one into the other, one for the other, both ways. Spirit is not better than matter. Matter is equally important for the logos made flesh, you could say, for our capacity to embody and inhabit our spirit via soul. Soul is the intermediary between spirit and our human embodiment. And it's through the process of the feminine mode of transformation, like we mentioned before, which is transmutation. Okay? All right, so now we're moving on to the next slide, which is the Ceres-Venus square that I mentioned. Ceres in her inception last week, July 21st, and the Venus superior conjunction on October 22nd. And Mercury as the psychopomp, another initiator, the communicator of the logos, of the word, of truth. So much could be said about this, but now is not the right time. But I just wanted to share that Mercury in the Eleusinian myth plays a very important role. Again, as Mercury normally does in these Greek myths, he acts as negotiator, and Mercury being the only Olympian god, well, really until Ceres or Persephone, you could say, who can traverse all the worlds, right? And I would even say Ceres might even have a leg up on Mercury because she became human for a time. So Ceres didn't go herself into the underworld, but an aspect of her did. Her daughter Persephone. She lost her naivete in the underworld, became a woman through, you could say, sexual initiation, through the enlivening of her Shakti, her sensuality, her sexual nature, and then eventually to become the crone, the elder. But Mercury I'm pointing out here because he's actually pretty prominent in both of these charts. So Mercury, as we know, is the ability to travel above and below, the integration of spirit and matter, masculine and feminine, right? Mercury is the hermaphrodite. Mercury is morning star here at the Ceres inception. So this is any planet at inception that's an outer planet, that's not like from Mars on outward. Any planet at inception is farthest from Earth. Venus, this is not the inception of her fate, of her cycle. This is the midpoint of her cycle, but she's farthest from Earth here too. So in a sense, we could say that Mercury, in a way, is acting as a bridge between, or an ability to help us navigate the morning star and evening star aspects of ourself through these successive initiations, first with Ceres and Sun here, and with Venus and Sun here. How do we bridge the I, me, mine with the us, we, them? And where does that take place? Well, through the feminine, it happens through love, through the heart. The masculine isn't excluded from the heart either, by no means, but the feminine is love. And this is not some, romantic, airy-fairy love. This is love as in truth. Love that doesn't care about right or wrong. That is all about truth. Logos. Mercury, masculine and feminine. So Mercury's morning star here and evening star here. Ceres is in Virgo for the Venus transmutation, which is the sign of Mercury. And also Ceres is strong in Virgo as an earth sign. She's the goddess of the grain, after all, in agriculture. So she's considered by some astrologers who work with her a modern co-ruler of Virgo. Okay. So could this be, when the Venus transmutation happens, if we've done our preparation and our little mini initiations and ego deaths before then, could this be the potential integration of Ceres and Jupiter, as we saw in the slide here, of Thesmophoros, of Demeter Thesmophoros? The wisdom, the earned wisdom aspect of Ceres after she's gone through her initiation of deep, deep loss and the grieving that necessarily accompanies any initiation. It's completely humanly normal to grieve what we believe we're losing, but just not to believe the stories that arise around what our emotional content is telling us about what we're losing. Have the experience of the grieving, which takes us down, down, down into, when we're not stuck in our heads around it, a deeper, deeper access into the tunnels and ley lines of our bodies to help us access the deeper wisdom in the lower chakras, the place of the unknown, the place where we really don't like to be much of the time because we're just not used to being there. But it's where knowledge and our fears are alchemized into wisdom. So whatever we do now, since the Ceres-Sun inception until October, can be preparation for us to really, really, no matter how challenging our initiations might be, no matter how much loss we feel like we're undergoing, if we strive, or if we choose not to make it personal, and we allow it to be ourselves to become more of the fletching of the arrow that stabilizes after the uncertainty comes and the shifts and the buttressing, can we find the fletching within us, that Leo center, and find our stability again without becoming fixed? Then we might actually be able to integrate and become more of Demeter Thesmophoros, more in tune with natural cosmic law that lives within each of us. So some additional thoughts. You might notice that I skipped the 2021 Ceres-Sun inception at 17 Aries, partially for time, but I also noted that right now, transiting Chiron is at 16 degrees Aries at the current Ceres-Sun inception, which took place last week, which is only 1 degree from the Ceres-Sun inception at 17 Aries. So one of the things that we've been having to deal with is Chiron in Aries, and how Chiron in Aries is affecting any planet in Aries, transiting, progressed, well, maybe not so much progressed or natal, unless Chiron is actually making a pass either by square or conjunction to a natal planet. But Chiron transiting through Aries, the other initiator besides Ceres and Mercury, which highlights our wounding around choosing on our own behalf, our definitions of freedom, our ability to seed something new. So this is going to be a whole other video topic that I'm going to go into, but it seems very poignant that at this 2021 Ceres-Sun inception, Chiron was at the point of inception for the last inception cycle, which began in 2021. So there's something around not having integrated whatever the last Ceres-Sun inception cycle, the last Ceres-Sun cycle was trying to teach us, that is imperative to really being able to access the potential of this new Ceres-Sun cycle. And again, vulnerability. If we remember that Chiron was in the 4th house in her discovery chart, trine the moon, being the higher octave of the moon. Vulnerability is the key to surrendering gracefully and surrendering empowered rather than as a victim. And one last thing, Ceres recently in the news. Now this isn't Ceres, but I came across something yesterday which seemed very fitting to what we were talking about, Demeter, Thesmophoros. I was reading about how, I guess, Pope Francis has been going through what he calls the apology tour to First Nations people and communities in Canada. They asked for it at the Vatican in April for an apology and restitution to be made to all of the First Nations people of Canada who were subject to these residential schools where these Native children were placed and forced to be away from their families. They were taken away from their families, basically for the sake of indoctrination, to tear them away from their culture, their community, and indoctrinate them into Christianity. So I'm not going to pronounce this right, but a woman named C.P. Ko was a member of the Ogichida Kwe nation, said to the Pope, spoke to him, "You are hereby served the spoken law. We, the daughters of the Great Spirit, and our tribal sovereign members cannot be forced into law or treaty that is not the great law." So again, in response to Pope Francis's apology tour, I'm not going to read this whole thing. You'll have this in the recording, but basically, this is what this potentiates. One facet of it is us owning our power. Now, in this case, these are two different factions at odds with each other, the First Nations people and the Catholic Church. But when we can do this internally, when we can reconcile with the parts of ourselves that have removed us from natural law, where we have been complicit just by virtue of being born in the human species, where we have been complicit with the power grabs and the manipulations of these institutions and the cultural manifestations of a perverted law that is not in alignment with natural law, and how we've benefited from them, how we've just assumed, again, not through our own fault consciously, but we've assumed some of the comforts that we are just accustomed to being born into this patriarchal society. Where can we learn love and forgiveness, self-honoring, taking ownership for, taking accountability in an honest, loving, and transparent way, so that we can really, really reclaim our innate power to choose differently, to make love the source of our power, and act accordingly through generosity as a result of alchemizing these experiences in ourselves, for ourselves first, become the generous contributors to supporting each other in these places of empowerment and self-empowerment, so that we can each heal our portion of the crystal of the greater human family and let that ripple out into the morphogenic field of our human species. That is my wish. That is my hope for all of us, to whatever extent we choose, if this made any sense to you. And I appreciate you watching all the way through if you have. I hope this was illuminating and insightful for you. I would really appreciate it if you would like or subscribe to this channel and pass it on to anybody that you think might enjoy it too. Thank you so much, and until next time.